job on the theme music, baby.
Thanks, babe.
Thanks. For everyone listening, that was Movie House Funhouse by Daniel Howard.
Movie House Funhouse. I like it. Didn't know I had a title until just now.
That's the title I came up with for it just now.
I like it.
All right. Why don't you tell them what we're about?
Well, first off, hello, everybody. My name is Daniel.
And I'm Katie. Hello, everyone, or no one.
Welcome to I'll Drink to Fact. This is a true story versus Hollywood podcast. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking a look at movies that are based on a true story and comparing them to the facts from the actual cases. And then we'll do a little comparison, see how much is true and checks out and how much doesn't.
And we'll be drinking.
Oh, yes. Definitely drinking while we're doing this. Also, just want to make a note that the movies that we'll be watching are dramatized versions, not documentaries, so we will not be looking at Netflix originals for everything that they release week to week. Cool.
That's fair.
This is just our intro episode, kind of let you know what our podcast is going to be about. We wanted to take a quick moment while we had your attention to tell you about the first ever movie based on a true story. Katie has done a lot of research on this, so I'm going to let her take it away.
Yeah, and so the movie that we're talking about is The Story of the Kelly Gang. It's the first feature-length movie based on a true story, like Daniel said. And I just wanted to talk to y'all about this a little bit, but not too much, because this movie came out in 1906, and there are more modern movies based on the story of Ned Kelly and the Kelly Gang, which I do want to talk about in future episodes of the podcast. But since this is our little introductive, oh my god, I've had one sip of alcohol.
And not only did this come out in 1906, but this came out the day after Christmas in 1906.
Boxing Day.
Right.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about this movie for our first little mini episode that we're doing. So I'll just get into it. So the story of the Kelly Gang, as I said, it came out in 1906 in Australia, is about Ned Kelly. He's an infamous Australian bushranger and outlaw. Some people view him as like a folk hero, like Australian Robin Hood type person. Others just see him as a vile murderer and criminal. So regardless of how you view him, and if you do view him, look up his picture. He kind of looks like he could be a hipster. You know how they have those like modern people, like proof of time travel, that there's like modern day people in like 1800s, like the Nicolas Cage and JC picture.
Keanu Reeves.
Yeah. He looks like he could be a modern day hipster, with his beard.
Is that why you told me to go as him for Halloween?
You kind of look like him.
Awesome.
He's got a beard and a coiffed hairdo. And I just wanted to say coiffed. So anyways, so the story of the Kelly Gang is about him, and like I said, this is just going to be a little taste of that movie and what his story is. So at the time of its release, The Kelly Gang was not only the first feature-length movie based on a true story, but it was also touted as the world's first full-length narrative feature film and the longest film at the time, with a runtime of 60 minutes.
Yeah, at this time, other feature-length films were about 40 minutes long. This is the first one that was well over that time. Like you said, 60 minutes, which even by today's standards would be considered a feature-length film. Films this length weren't released in America for another 6 years.
Well, and so here's the thing. The movie came out in 1906, and the full-length movie doesn't really exist anymore because it was so old. You can only find about 15 minutes of the original film. So really, I'm going off of what I was able to find on the internet regarding the movie's plot and production. So that's just kind of my full disclosure right now. I haven't seen the whole movie. I don't know if anyone's still alive that has seen the whole movie. We've
seen the 17 minutes that they've Australian?
Yeah, so you can find the video on YouTube. Australia's National Film and Sound Archive did a really good job of piecing together what film remains of the movie. They also worked in stills and what am I looking for? There were like these pamphlets that they sold at the movie's release or programs. So they were taking from that booklet because those booklets still exist. And apparently those booklets had, because this is a silent film, black and white. So as you can imagine, they had what they called narrative titles, I believe, where it basically captioned what was happening. And these little program booklets had the full narrative titles in them, so they were able to go off of the titles and be able to have a good idea of what was going on in the movie, even though they didn't have the film itself.
Right. These people going to see these movies actually could have, if they wanted to, read ahead and spoil it all for themselves.
I didn't even think about that. And I hate spoilers. That would have gotten me so mad.
I also, with this being a silent film, read that a couple of the theaters where this was shown were actually being complained about because of the loud sound, because this wasn't a typical silent film with like all the like orchestral like overtures and everything. It's believed that during like some of these, they actually had people like off stage explaining what was going on in each scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was like so loud that people were like, I thought I came to see a silent movie, and like they've got this person basically saying like, all right, in this scene, Ned is shooting somebody right in the face.
That's not enjoyable.
Right, yeah, it was
it was probably nice if you were blind and went to the movie.
Right, exactly, but why are you going to a silent film blind?
But that's kind of crazy, because I'd be like, oh my god, I just want to watch the movie. So like I said, if you go on YouTube, and I think if you just search for the story of the Kelly gang, you can find this clip that we watched. Again, it's bits and pieces of the film. I'll warn you ahead of time if you go and watch it. It is silent. They don't put in any music, although as Daniel mentioned at the time, they would have had like sound effects and like music being played off to the side, or in some cases an unnecessary narrator. So, I have in my notes, it's a lot of reading. When we watched it was kind of slow moving, and you would like read a title and then just kind of sit and wait. But it is cool because you do get to see like some of the actual film. They do include some of the damaged clips, so it's you get kind of the bubbly, I don't know what that's called.
Like celluloid sort of stuff. It is kind of hard to follow the narrative of it because of the fact that so much of it is missing. They did put in the storyline to try and move it along. However, you're also talking about somebody releasing the first feature film in a time where there were not feature films.
Yeah.
So a lot of the scenes were very long and just drawn out as opposed to what you would expect to see in a movie now. Yeah. But it is quite boring to watch. People just walk around for 5 minutes.
It's historical. It's cool if you want to. I mean, the fact that there still exists film of this, like the first feature-length film, like it's pretty cool. And
yeah,
like I said, the Australia's National Film and Sound Archive did a really good job of trying to put it together and let everyone see it. So with that said, I'll get more into the production of the movie. This movie is the first and maybe only credited work to Charles Tate, who is believed to have written and directed the film. And since this film came out so early, there's not a lot of record on who was actually in the movie. Or, like I said, it's believed that Charles Tate wrote and directed it, so it's like they don't even know for sure.
Right. And there's like certain members of his family that have like taken credit, and then like other members I saw.
Yeah, I read that like some say his brother wrote it and then he directed it, and he and his brothers owned a playhouse. Is that right? Did you?
Right. It's the place where it was first shown, Melbourne's Athenaeum, if I'm pronouncing that right. They own that, and that's where it was first shown. That's actually
that makes sense.
Also why, because I was looking into why the first film was about bushrangers, and at the time there was a lot of plays about bushrangers, and it's believed that they had a current play going on at Melbourne's Athenaeum, and that they own the rights to, and that's what they turned into this film.
Oh, was the play about Ned Kelly?
Yeah.
Oh,
they said at this time in Melbourne there was probably 6 playhouses that were devoted strictly to like Ned Kelly and bushranger type plays.
Wow, that's really cool. So Ned Kelly was a big deal. Like,
absolutely.
There's a reason why.
Oh, and we haven't mentioned this. This movie came out 26 years after he was executed.
Spoiler alert!
Sorry.
To the end. Hate spoilers.
I'll edit that out.
No, you won't. Okay. But as I was saying, since this was such an old film and like one of the first big ones, not a lot of records were kept as to who was actually in it. Only 2 of the actors have been confirmed credits in this movie. They are
Brad Pitt and just joking.
It's actually Nicolas Cage and Jay-Z.
Hove?
It's John Ford, who played Dan Kelly, who is Ned Kelly's brother, and Elizabeth Tate, who is Charles Tate's wife, the director. She played Kate Kelly's stunt double. Kate Kelly is one of the Kelly sisters, and it specifically says that Elizabeth Tate played her stunt double and not Kate Kelly herself.
Interesting.
Which I thought was funny because when we were watching it, you
I thought
were
Kate
like,
Kelly was
that
a
is a
man."
man. That is a man dressed up as a woman doing those stunts.
Nope, it's the director's wife that I'm calling a man.
But yeah, so the rest of the cast has been speculated as to whether or not they were in there. Perhaps the most notable other actor in it, and I use notable loosely as in he was the only other actor who had film credits on IMDb other than this movie, was Frank Mills, and Frank Mills played Ned Kelly, they think. So Frank Mills was an actor who had 27 acting credits to his name, according to IMDb, between the years of 1906, when this movie came out, so this movie would have been his first credit, through 1920, and he died in 1921. So getting into the movie itself, the movie opens with Constable Fitzpatrick visiting the Kelly homestead, searching for outlaw Ned Kelly and his accomplice brother Dan Kelly and their gang, which only had 4 people in it. So it was Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. The most notable scene of the film, which still exists, you can still go watch it, it's the final standoff with Ned Kelly and the police. So at this point, the Kelly gang is holed up in the Glen Rowan Hotel, which I believe is really called the Glen Rowan Inn. And sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Glen Rowan. So at this point, the Kelly gang has torn up the railroad tracks that are leading into town in an attempt to prevent the police forces from reaching them. The movie then says that one of the citizens in the hotel, Mr. Curnow, attempts to win over the gang by notifying them that the station manager, Mr. Stanistreet, has a gun. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned this. So at this point, they have the citizens held hostage in the hotel with them.
Right.
So while everyone is held hostage, one of the citizens is trying to win the gang members' favor by saying, hey, this guy's got a gun. So then the gang fights with Stanistreet to try and take the gun from him. And in the middle of this tussle, Curnow escapes the hotel, quote, risking his life, end quote, in time to warn the train that is carrying the police officers of the damaged railroad tracks leading into town. So, unaware that the train has been saved, Ned Kelly and his gang are kind of enjoying themselves in the hotel. They're drinking, they're dancing, they're playing cards with the citizens. And in this scene, the actor playing Ned Kelly, he goes to stand on a barrel to give a toast when he's startled by gunshots piercing the hotel walls. So some action there. Gunshots are then exchanged between the gang members and the policemen, and unfortunately, we see the son of the hotel's owner killed by a stray bullet. At this point, the police have the hotel surrounded, so they decide to smoke the gang out by lighting the hotel on fire.
Which is always a good idea.
Right, that's, yep. But yeah, so they're planning on setting the hotel on fire with citizens still inside too. Not just the gang members, but citizens of Glen Rowan.
Right, they were acceptable casualties.
Oh.
Right?
So one sound person, Father Gibney, tries to stop the police from lighting the building on fire because there are hostages inside, including women and children. So he's like, hey, let's not do that. So the policemen tell Father Gibney not to enter the hotel. And the next scene narrative, which, or narrative title rather, which I got a kick out of, read, Brave Priest to the Rescue. Sure enough, the police light the building on fire, and the priest is shown running into the burning building. The next narrative title reads, Steve and Dan shoot each other. And this was also one of my favorite scenes because the two gang members, Steve Hart and Dan Kelly, comically shoot each other at the same time, falling down dead.
About 5 feet from each other, just randomly just pull out their weapons, point them at each other, and shoot for no reason whatsoever.
Yep, both fall down dead at the same time. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, the hotel's on fire, Steve and Dan are dead, Priest is running into a burning building to save citizens, Ned Kelly, leader of the gang, has escaped, and he is waiting in bulletproof armor for the morning to arrive in order to ambush
bulletproof armor.
the policeman. Yes, I'll get more to the armor later when I talk about the real story. Once he emerges, the policemen shoot the armored figure, but the bullets have no effect because it's bulletproof. Eventually, the police find that his legs are not protected by the armor, so they shoot at his legs until he is brought down and taken into custody. The movie ends with the narrative title, and this was also one of my favorites, a gem. Thus falls the last of the Kelly gang, and with the fall of Ned Kelly, the last of the Bushrangers. So that's my summary of the most exciting scene of that movie.
The scene where they do finally shoot him in the legs, and with the armor being very reminiscent of, is like the Monty Python and the Holy Grail scene where he's like, "'Tis but a scratch."
Merely a flesh wound.
Yes.
Yes.
Fully expected Ned Kelly to be hopping around on one leg.
That is exactly what the armor looks like. You can go look up a picture of it, and it very much looks exactly like that.
Yeah.
Which was comical to me, like comical to us in the time because we have the Monty Python reference. But I don't know, maybe at the time people were like, what? This is 1906.
This is the 1900s, and this dude made his own armor
to
stand against the police. That's ballsy.
Right?
I mean, did they test this out? Did they put this on like the new Bush Rangers? And they're like, hey Sam, why don't you go stand against that tree? And well, he didn't make it.
There was actually a fifth member of the Kelly gang that didn't make it because of all the other iterations.
But they did learn that they had to put one more layer of wood on there.
That's right. Okay, so that was my summary of the movie. Let's get into what really happened to Ned Kelly and the Kelly gang.
I am ready to hear it.
Okay. So, as it was depicted in the movie, the gang did take over the small town of Glen Rowan in 1880. Again, you mentioned this movie just came out 26 years after that. They really did have the railroad workers destroyed the tracks going into town, so the train-carrying police enforcement couldn't make it in, which I thought was like really smart.
It was smart, but as a railway worker, my God, I'd have been pissed. I'm like, I just laid this shit, dude. Like, you want me to dig it back up? Like, that's not what the tools are for.
And he did. He had the railroad workers. Yeah, the ones who probably laid it down. Tore it up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was smart though. It was smart. So the town's population of 62 people were held in the hotel, which is impressive.
So they rounded up the entire town and put them in a hotel?
The entire town, yes.
Wow.
All 62 people were there.
And we're talking 4 people against 62, basically.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say they were against them because even though the townspeople were being held hostage, they were allowed to drink, dance, and play games. So, I mean, it just really sounds like they were just having a good time.
Okay, so in the film, they robbed them.
You might be thinking of an earlier scene when they were at the young husband's station or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
That was
That's what I'm thinking of.
before
Okay.
this. Yeah. There was a different town where they robbed people. But here's the thing about the Kelly gang. Kind of to their credit, I'll say, they never harmed or robbed from women and children.
Right.
They took that moral stance, I guess. That's where they drew the line. So from what I researched, they didn't hurt any of the hostage that they had, and any of the 62 people they didn't hurt. They didn't rob them people
had a dance contest.
Apparently there are some like really there are like illustrations of like the gang members like dancing with the hostages, like just like everyone like getting along and having a good time. And I mean, so this is the entire town that's in there. And I read somewhere that, I mean, journalists were there, so journalists were like drawing pictures or whatever they do and like writing stories and stuff. Well, I mean, it's not like they had Polaroids with them. I mean, yeah, people said that the Kelly gang actually like really took good care of the hostages. So not a bad deal, but one ungrateful citizen that I'll call, I'm kidding, managed to alert the police of the damaged railroad tracks so they could make it into town safely. And that citizen was the schoolmaster, Thomas Curnow, who, so actually this story wasn't mentioned in the movie, but Ned Kelly had selected Thomas Curnow and another number of the other hostages to assist in the capture of a constable stationed nearby. So once they kidnapped this constable, presumably, Curnow convinced Kelly to release the hostages along with himself, and Kelly agreed on the condition that they, quote, go to bed and not dream too loud. Aww. So he let the hostages go, but when Curnow heard the train approaching in the night, he hailed the train down to warn them of the destroyed tracks going into Glenrowan, allowing them to stop and regroup and safely make it to the inn where the Kelly gang was hiding out with the rest of the citizens. Ned Kelly was being a nice guy, let them go, and
Damn,
what does he
school
do
teachers had to up and
to
fuck
repay
'em.
him? But tell the police exactly where to go. This guy. So, once the police made it into town safely and had the hotel surrounded, the police and the gang exchanged gunshots back and forth throughout the night. So it kind of wasn't quite like the dramatic standoff that was shown in the movie where they like show up and start shooting right away. They kind of like shot sporadically throughout the night at each other and all throughout the night. And it is also reported that the policemen started the shooting. So it's kind of like they started it, which
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess.
that was depicted in the movie too, but... So at this point, members of the police force and gang suffer minor gunshot wounds, but no one dies. This is a quote that I'm taking from an article, quote, in the fog of the early morning, end quote. Kelly comes out in armor and begins firing at the police with a pistol. The armor is made from iron plowshares, complete with a bucket-style helmet to protect his head with a slit in it allowing him to see. As we mentioned, it looked a lot like the Monty Python.
Yeah, it definitely looks like if you took a metal mop bucket and cut a 1-inch slit so you could see out of it.
Yeah, I think that's literally all it is.
Let's hope it was a little bit more. Otherwise, the bullets back then were definitely...
Maybe the buckets back then were just really
Hey, there you go.
strong.
There you go. They were built to last.
That's right. They don't make them like they used to.
That's the truth.
All right. So upon seeing this, the police were so caught off guard that they thought they were seeing a ghost, or I'm going to try to pronounce this correctly, a bunyip?
Got me.
Which is a terrifying looking mythical creature from Aboriginal mythology. So it's kind of like, I kind of looked up.
Like a boogeyman.
It's essentially their boogeyman. It takes a lot of different forms. It's a creature, animal-like, sometimes humanoid. So
It's like a shape-shifting boogeyman.
yeah, there's a lot of different accounts of what it looks like. I mean,
Okay.
it's like a Bigfoot. It's probably like their Sasquatch. People claim they have seen it, but it's like it doesn't really exist. I get the feeling that that's what this
Gotcha.
bunyip
Gotcha.
is. So that's what the police thought they were seeing. One officer is even reporting as saying that he thought it was the devil himself.
The Devil and Ned Kelly.
Is that a movie?
No.
It should be.
It will be next.
Right? Okay. So the police fired back with bullets bouncing off of Kelly's armor because it was apparently bulletproof. And just like in the movie, eventually the police officers noticed the weak spot in his armor, which was that it didn't cover his legs at all. So the officers shot him in the legs and the groin. in order to bring him down. Once Kelly was brought down, the officers headed to the Glen Rowan Inn to capture the remaining members of the Kelly gang. So at this point, the police officers kind of went crazy on the building to get the gang members, even though there were still civilians inside. So here they are ambushing the building, and there are still people inside. It's reported that many people suffered wounds from the gunshots. I've seen the number of people killed at this point by the police officers accidentally to be like between 2 and 4 people, and one of them being the 11-year-old son of the hotel's landlady. So,
that part was definitely true.
Yes, that part is reported to be true.
Were you able to find if the 2 Ned Kelly gang guys actually shot themselves?
Oh, I'll get to that.
Oh, sorry. I'm
That's
jumping
all right.
ahead.
Yeah. So
I'm anxious.
I can tell. You're so excited about this. It is reported that Joe Byrne was shot and killed at 5:30 in the morning as he was raising a toast at the bar. They don't really say, I haven't really read if he was killed by another hostage or like a ricochet of police fire. I'm not really sure what he was raising a toast to, if the police were attacking the building, and then also the leader of his gang had just
I hope it
been
wasn't
captured.
too long life. It's a long fight.
Joe Byrne dead. Which I thought was interesting. The movie version never really addressed what happened to Joe Byrne, because remember they have that scene where Dan and Steve shoot each other.
Right.
They never said what happened to the 4th gang member.
So this was the first full-length mystery too, then. Sorry. That was horrible.
Murder mystery. So Joe Byrne has been killed. The other 2 members of the gang kept returning police fire, and at 10 a.m. they surrendered and released about 30 hostages at this time. The police ordered everyone else in the building to lie down, and at this point they began to set fire to the hotel. So it sounds like roughly half of the hostages made it out, and the police, I don't know if they told them to stay in there or what happened exactly, but there were still remaining hostages in the building when the police started to set the building on fire. So I also read that the evening before that the gang members released some of the women and children hostages, but some sources said that, some didn't. And I was kind of like, well, if they released women and children hostages, how did the 11-year-old kid die then? If he was released the night before. Unless he just like stayed behind with his mom because she was the landlady of the hotel.
Right.
So I wasn't really sure. So...
Well, I mean, hell, they don't even know who directed and wrote the movie. So, I mean, we are like going off of word of mouth facts here,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I guess regardless of how many hostages were still in the building when the police went to go set it on fire, there were still at least some hostages in the building, because at this point, Matthew Gibney, a priest, tried to stop the police from setting the building on fire because there were still people inside. As it was depicted in the movie, the police refused, and apparently an unfortunate wind caused the whole structure to catch fire quite rapidly. At this point, the priest ran into the building to rescue anyone inside, and once inside, he discovered that Steve Hart and Dan Kelly had apparently killed themselves in a suspected suicide pact. So it's not really sure exactly what happened, but they were both dead, and I think both had died from gunshot wounds.
Okay.
So, I mean, kind of
Suicide pact
unlikely
definitely
that they shot each other simultaneously as was depicted in the movie, but
I mean, you know, it does make sense that it's a suicide pact. Like, hey, I'm not going back
totally.
to, I don't know, wherever, Van Diemen's Land. But yeah, in the movie, definitely did not get it that it was suicide pact. It looked like somebody got pissed off because somebody slept with somebody's sister or something, and they just shot each other
at the same time. Yeah. I think there was a little bit of artistic license taken with that one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
As entertaining as it was. At this point, you know, we have Ned Kelly captured. So that was one thing that kind of differed from the movie, was just the order of events. In real life, I believe Ned Kelly was captured before the building was set on fire.
Right. It sounds like just the 2 that had the suicide pact were left when everything else was going.
Right. I mean, Ned Kelly, the policemen didn't kill Ned Kelly. They just arrested him. So he was still alive. But yeah, he had been captured at that point. Right. The Joe Byrne had been shot and
Yes, Walter. We hear you.
So the order of events was a little.
But it seems
out
like
of
they
order.
got pretty much everything in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was surprised with how accurate it was, but I also didn't know. It kind of made me wonder how much was written history versus how much was like, oh, well, this is how it's depicted in the movie. So, like, this makes sense as to how it probably happened. It almost seemed like it matched up too closely and still made an entertaining movie.
right. Well, I feel like back then maybe they could have just easily have told the story. You know, sometimes real life is weirder than fiction, and you're able to do that.
True.
You know, as we'll get into as this podcast goes along, more dramatizations are taken nowadays, a lot more creative license, a lot more flubbing the truth happens nowadays. But back then, maybe it was easy to just like tell a story. Maybe it was a historical thing. You know, obviously they couldn't film a documentary. They probably didn't even have the idea for a documentary back then. But it was definitely interesting to see, and I'm glad you did the research to show that, you know, it was pretty
spot on. I was surprised.
Pretty spot on, yeah.
Yeah. And then, not shown in the movie, but in real life, Ned Kelly was tried and hanged just 4 months later in 1880. As I mentioned before, he was kind of seen as this Robin Hood folk hero. I don't know if you're going to get into it a little bit, but there's kind of this dichotomy between the police and the public, I guess, or maybe bush rangers in general. I don't know, but a lot of people kind of identified with Ned Kelly and saw him as their folk hero. And I think I read somewhere that actually thousands of people showed up to his hanging and demanded a reprieve. That he,
wow,
yeah, because he was so loved.
That's crazy.
So,
yeah. I didn't really get into like the dichotomy of like why people love bushrangers versus why the cops were hated at the time in Australia, and it might not even be the fact that like cops were hated, just maybe like there's such a fascination with American outlaws that, you know, maybe it was a similar sort of situation there. These men that are able to just live out in the bush for like, you know, a long time. Basically, they would live on nothing out there, and then they would come into town and rob and, you know, plunder. And
is that what a bush ranger is?
right, yeah, that's what I was looking at. That's why they had the name bush rangers. These guys would basically use the expanse of Australia and like the just like nothingness out there as a means to hide from cops and everything. Oh, basically, I mean, if you're in the middle of the damn desert, where the hell are they gonna find you?
Yeah, hiding in the wide open.
But one thing I do want to mention is that at the release of this film, and then after, there was like the interest in bush rangers like skyrocketed. I mean, you know, like I said, at the time there was probably like 6 houses in Melbourne that were dedicated to Ned Kelly and bushranger type stories. And then after that number just went up. So much that in 1909, 3 years after this film was made, the Australian government put a ban on bushranger films. Like, you couldn't make a bushranger film because it was making heroes out of these, you know, villains, basically.
Gotcha.
It was glorifying crime.
Right.
Which, you know, we don't know anything about today. But the ban lasted for over 30 years. It was in the 1940s before they were able to make bushranger films again. And, you know, like you mentioned at the beginning, there have been several other Ned Kelly based films that we'll get into, you know, as this podcast goes on. But it'll be interesting to see. The other couple notes I took about just the production of the film was the cast and crew worked for 6 months to film this. A lot of it was shot on the Tate's property.
Oh, I did not know that.
And it costs about £1,000 to film.
Okay.
This is at a time also when Australia was becoming their own after England's rule there. So I guess they were still using British pounds at the time before they had switched over to Australian dollars. And if I'm wrong on that, please call me out on it. I don't know enough, to be honest with you.
I think it's Australian dollars.
It is now, but I don't know if that's what they switched to from the pounds back then. I know eventually it got to Australian dollars.
Gotcha. Question.
Yes, ma'am.
It took 6 months to film. Is that pretty on par with how long it takes to make a movie now? Or is that shorter, longer?
Yeah, It honestly depends. I mean, some movies nowadays take about 6 months. Could take less time. It depends how much production goes into them. Some take far longer. Terry Gilliam worked on a Don Quixote film for like, I don't want to say like 20 years or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, a long time.
So, I mean, 6 months to film. I mean, that is almost kind of like a modern
Right,
movie.
but I also don't know if they filmed it straight for 6 months or if we're talking 6 months and then there was some sort of editing. I don't know how much editing was done back then.
Yeah.
I do know that this was released at one time. One of the things I was looking at with the other feature films that were about 40 minutes long in America at the time is they were being released on like 12 different spools. So they weren't like cohesive movies. They were being released at almost like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 12 sort of things, and then being called feature-length films because they all added up to 40 minutes.
Oh, gotcha.
And this one was released as a 60-minute piece.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I think I read that somewhere. It was like literally the longest piece of film, like not just like length, like movie lengthwise, but like measuring
like physical
inches.
lengthwise.
Yes, on a spool of film, this was the longest.
Well, it's probably meters because we're in Australia.
Oh, sure.
But you know,
Sorry.
I think that's all I have on this. I'm glad you did all the research you did for the film and the true story.
It was fun, and I thought it would be very appropriate for us to talk about the first based on a true story movie on the first kind of mini episode of our podcast. So,
and I agree with you. Definitely wouldn't argue. Here on future podcasts, we will each be taking not necessarily a side, but a part of this in researching. One of us will be researching the details of the film and the facts and the storyline, and then the other one will be detailing the actual true event. And then we will compare notes and kind of see how everything fleshes out. But that's all I got for today.
our drinks. We didn't talk about our drinks.
Oh, we did not talk about our drinks.
What you got in your cup there? What did you have in your cup there?
There's a sip left of. I had a whiskey sour using some Sazerac rye whiskey that we bought when we were in New Orleans. What did you have, ma'am?
I concocted my own cocktail with some dark rum, which is my favorite, and like a coconut water juice blend with pineapple and mango, and a splash of Pat O'Brien's pina colada mix, which I
also picked up in New Orleans.
That's right. We also bought that while we were in New Orleans. So
not that we just drank and ate in New Orleans, but we did drink and eat a lot in New Orleans.
I mean, yeah, what else is there to do?
Well, we went on cemetery tours and haunted tours and a whole bunch of stuff. Learned some true stories there.
Yeah, we did.
But yeah, so this has been we're not calling it our first episode. We're calling it episode 0.5, the precursor episode.
The minisode.
The minisode. Even though we are hitting in late numbers.
It's all right. Edit it.
So look forward to the next several episodes.
Yeah. We look forward to bringing you some facts and movies and letting you know what... I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay. How about you just tell us what movies we have lined up for the next few episodes?
We will be detailing the movie Carla, starring Laura Prepon and Misha Collins as Paul Bernardo. Laura Prepon plays Carla Homolka, which is my favorite name to say. Not a good... We'll get into it.
Yeah. Not a great story, but...
No. Then we will talk about Winchester and Pain and Gain. Winchester being about the Winchester mansion built by the widow of the Winchester family, as in Winchester rifles?
Yes.
Firearms? And then Pain and Gain, you'll have to fill in, because I'm very unfamiliar with this story and movie.
It is about, it's the Sun Gym crimes. There was kidnapping, extortion, torture, murder, lots of different things committed by some bodybuilders. It's been dramatized. I will get that
the word
before we get to a year, I swear.
This episode is brought to you by...
Dramatized. It's been it's been made into a film starring yes, it's been made into a film starring Mark Wahlberg, Dwayne Johnson, and a few other people. I believe Tony Shalhoub's in it. Anyway, we will just be looking into the stories there. So that's what's going to be coming up in our next 3 episodes. We've got a long list of episodes to share with you, and we hope that you stay tuned.
And just wanted to say, if you've got any suggestions, let us know what you want to hear.
Yeah, definitely. If there's something that you know about, maybe we don't, please drop us a line. Our email is drinktofact@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram @drinktofact, Twitter @drinktofact. But thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.